Welcome to Nice and Blunt. My name is Adam Marancho, and it's Wednesday, so it's time for my wide receiver rankings for week 3. Just like I mentioned in the running back video, I will bring up a few stats, especially for matchup purposes, but some of them I believe, others I don't, and I'll cross that bridge as I get to it with each player. But let's bring up some players who are not in these rankings due to injury. Marquise Brown is out for the season, it looks like. Puka Nacua for at least a few more weeks. Same with Cooper Kupp. He's not technically on IR, but I feel like he might be soon. Wouldn't shock me if they put him on IR. But Deebo Samuel is also out. AJ Brown out as well with a hamstring injury. Keenan Allen, I did not rank due to his heel injury. And Jordan Addison has an ankle injury. He is not in these rankings either, but there are a few that are questionable that I did include. So let's get going. Let's begin at number 1, where I think this is the game where Ja'Marr Chase explodes, and I have him here at number 1 versus Washington, because the Commanders are the best fantasy matchup for wide receivers you can ask for. They allow 44.7 points per game to wide receivers so far, and that was Tampa Bay. Baker's legit, but also Daniel Jones. We don't worry about that. Jones looked decent. Nabers went off. So Chase has an elite ceiling, and after a frustrating first 2 weeks, I think he's absolutely going to hit that ceiling. They've allowed 6 wide receiver touchdowns. I wouldn't be shocked if Chase scores at least 2, maybe even 3. If you recall, like last year, that game against Arizona week 5, he went ballistic. We could see another 40-plus point game for Ja'Marr. So he's clearly my number 1 this week. I will not be budging on that, even if T. Higgins plays. And number 2, I have CeeDee Lamb versus Baltimore. And the Ravens are historically known for a good secondary, but through 2 weeks, they're actually the 6th best fantasy matchup you could ask for wide receivers. They give up 32.7 points per game so far, and that's thanks to 3 wide receiver touchdowns and also 164 yards per game to wide receivers. So CeeDee Lamb should be pretty good. Baltimore is desperate for a win, but the Cowboys also just got embarrassed by the Saints, and I think this is more of a shootout than like a complete defensive juggernaut with like less than 20 points per team. So I'm not worried. Lamb is matchup proof in general, so you shouldn't worry about it. And if anything, I would give him an upgrade. I'm just that much more confident in Ja'Marr. That's why I have Chase at number 1. But at number 3, I have Justin Jefferson versus Houston, who is questionable with a leg injury, but according to reports, he is doing fine. That quad is not a concern. He's now day to day, so he's a much safer bet to play on Sunday than I thought on Monday. So that's good news. He's moving in the right direction. They definitely need him versus Houston. And if you were concerned about Sam Darnold and the quarterback play he's going to get this season, I think that has all been put to rest after the first 2 games. I ranked him here at wide receiver 3 entering the season, and it looks like it was wise to trust him. Darnold is not an issue at all, and I do trust Jefferson moving forward as that elite option week over week. Number 4, though, I have Nico Collins at Minnesota, and Nico leads the NFL in receiving yards right now. He looks like the clear alpha for CJ Stroud, and that makes him a must start every single week. I can't really envision ranking him outside the top 10 moving forward. I think he'll be consistently in the top 5 if these numbers persist. So love Nico. Very happy with him at the moment. Number 5, though, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown at Arizona, and he is questionable, dealing with a lower leg soft tissue injury as well. So that is something to monitor, but I'm not too worried about it. Last week, he had 19 targets in week 2. In week 1, he only had 6, so the bounce back was expected. Maybe it led to that injury, though. So I expect him to play through it. I'm not worried about it, but they might continue to lean on Jameson Williams and offer him a bit more rest and get tackled a little bit less often. So that's my only hesitation why I have him ranked behind Nico. But also Laporta has yet to go off either, and maybe we're not going to see 19 targets for St. Brown. But he's a lock in your lineup no matter what. You are never benching him when healthy. Number 6, though, moving down the list, is Tyreek Hill at Seattle. And the Seahawks are actually a bottom 3 matchup on paper, but that was mostly because of the Patriots last week, so I'm not worried about it. Tyreek can torch them no matter what, even though Devon Witherspoon is a legit matchup. I'm not going to pretend like he's bad. I am only downgrading Tyreek because Skylar Thompson is the quarterback. We cannot pretend like that doesn't impact him at all. I just think you're still trusting the matchup proof ability of Tyreek Hill. I think Waddle is a lot more impacted due to the quarterback change. But Tyreek is still a player with an explosive ceiling. It's elite. The floor, though, is a bit lower. Number 7, I have Chris Godwin versus Denver. He's looked insane this season. PFF currently ranks him as the league's number 1 wide receiver through 2 games. I mean, it helps that he got the Washington Commanders as well as the Detroit Lions, neither of which have a secondary you're worried about. But Godwin looks like he finally has taken over the number 1 role away from Mike Evans. It is a contract season for him as well, and he's getting the most targets. I would lean into this production, and if the touchdowns are going to hit every single week, we would have a top 10 receiver clearly on our hands with Chris Godwin. So I really trust him. Shockingly, Denver actually is the toughest fantasy wide receiver matchup so far, but last week they faced Pittsburgh, so that's a big reason why. Surtain rarely travels into the slot. I think he's going to shadow Mike Evans in this game. Maybe we'll see a few matchups between the two. I think it'd be wiser to cover Godwin, but he plays in the slot. Surtain is usually out wide, and that's why I'm not going to worry about it. Also, Surtain has been ranked as one of the worst corners, according to PFF. He currently comes in as corner number 96. That is not what we expected from Patrick Surtain, and there's not even 100 to compete with. So, holy shit, he's had a rough start to the season. So, start Chris Godwin, that is for sure. Number 8, though, I got Rashee Rice at Atlanta, and Rice looks like the Chiefs' best weapon moving forward. Now that Pacheco is out and Kelsey is having a very slow start to the season, you cannot bench Rashee Rice. He's their best offensive player at the moment. He's a must start for the foreseeable future because he's tied to Patrick Mahomes. Number 9, I have Garrett Wilson versus New England, and New England was absolutely torched by DK Metcalf and JSN last Sunday. It's a short week. The Jets are playing at home. It's a division game. Also in prime time, I think he flashes the upside that we're expecting. Last week, there was no reason to worry about Christian Gonzalez of the Patriots secondary. So I don't have any issues here. The volume will materialize soon enough, and I think Garrett Wilson's still a must start despite a slow start that hasn't lived up to expectation. I still think you have to start him no matter what. So top 10 player, that's for sure. Number 10, I got Brandon Aiyuk at the Rams, and the Rams are actually a top 9 wide receiver matchup, but mainly because they've allowed 3 wide receiver touchdowns so far. So that really helps the equation for Aiyuk. Debo is out for at least a couple weeks, I think, and Aiyuk just got paid. It's time to prove why. So the slump ends here against a bitter rival. I expect Purdy to go off, and while I do think they lean on Jordan Mason a lot, I expect 10-plus targets for Aiyuk with no Debo on the field. He is a clear top 10 receiver. I ranked him number 9 entering the season. Now is where the fun begins. Aiyuk will go off in week 3. Number 11, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Detroit, and this is a great matchup. The number 3 for fantasy wide receivers so far this season. So they give up a 38.7 points per game, and mainly because of volume. They give up 19 catches per game, as well as 223 yards per game to wide receivers. That is by far the most. Second place is only 198. So 25 extra yards to the wide receiver position than the number 2 matchup available. That's about 13% of an increase. So that is what I'm going to trust. I think Detroit is a matchup to chase all year long. And week 1 was just the rookie debut for Marvin Harrison. I'm throwing that out. I think Marv continues to play as advertised in week 3. Week 2 was phenomenal. So I'm trusting him. I think he's locked into your lineup moving forward. Number 12, though, I got Chris Olave versus the Eagles. And Philly is the number 2 matchup for fantasy wide receivers, allowing 41.8 points per game. Last year, they were also top 3. So I would trust these numbers. I do believe you want to play receivers against the Eagles. They've also given up 5 touchdowns to wide receivers so far. So right now, they can't stop anyone. For the second year in a row, that is the case, and there's not enough experience for the young new additions to really concern you. So Olave is due for a big game. He's had some bad game script, but last week he did pop off for over 80 yards on only 4 catches, and I think he's going to get close to 10 targets in this game. So this is the spot where it happens. I think this is one of his better games of the season, and I do still trust him as a reliable wide receiver too. Number 13 on the list, I got Davante Adams versus Carolina, and he had a big game in week 2 during a comeback win versus Baltimore. I thought that would happen in week 1, so it's good to see him play well. He should go off in the home opener here in Vegas, but since last year, the Panthers secondary has actually been a stout defense statistically against the pass, mainly because opponents are leading so early and by so much that they do not need to pass in order to win comfortably. So that's my only hesitation here. The game script could really favor Zamir White in the second half. If they have the luxury to do that, I think Antonio Pierce will try to get him rolling. Zamir has had a rough first 2 games, but I still think Davante Adams will be perfectly fine. It's him, it's Bowers as the best options they have, and I still think you're going to get 10 plus targets for Adams. So fire him up. After last week, you got to feel a little confident in his ability. Number 14, though, I have DeVonta Smith at the Saints, and with A.J. Brown unavailable, you have to start DeVonta. He has top 10 upside in this scenario, but he wasn't crazy involved last week versus Atlanta without Brown on the field. He had 8 targets in week 1, and that only increased to 10. We would have expected like maybe 12 with no A.J. Brown. So I'm not going to complain about it. 10 targets is very valuable, but just don't expect like 15 plus, and that's why I can't put him in the top 10. There's some really good matchups and good other options ranked above him. So very high floor. I still trust him, but unless we're getting like garbage time as early as the third quarter because the Saints are up by a huge score, I doubt we're going to get like elite volume from DeVonta Smith. But this could turn into a shootout. I would trust him for sure. You have to start him with no A.J. Brown. Number 15, though, I have Zay Flowers at Dallas, and he has 2 straight games with over 10 targets. If he scores a touchdown, you are golden with Flowers. But I think no matter what, the floor is very safe with this type of volume. You have to start him. I think he'll be top 20 in my rankings moving forward, barring an injury. Love what I'm seeing from Flowers from a volume standpoint. Number 16, I have DJ Moore at the Colts, and Indianapolis ranks as the number 5 matchup for opposing wide receivers. They give up 33 points per game to the wide receiver position, and that includes 3 touchdowns to wide receivers. That's kind of the main reason here, but they also give up 35 rushing yards per game to wide receivers as well. So look out for some jet sweeps in this one. I think that could pop off. DJ is clearly their number 1 weapon, and he should lock up similar volume to last year while Keenan Allen is out. So I'm trusting him. I know that Caleb Williams has struggled, but despite that, I think DJ Moore is still a must start. It will fix itself soon enough for their best receiver. I think Caleb will figure things out as the weeks go by. So I'm not really sure about anyone else on this team, but if I have DJ Moore, I'm still starting him and ranking him top 20. Number 17, I have Jameson Williams at Arizona, and it's a bit shocking, but he has been used as equivalent to a number 1 wide receiver throughout the league. St. Brown returned to alpha status last week with 19 targets. However, Jameson Williams is averaging 10 targets per game through the first 2 weeks. He's catching 5 per game for a total 114 yards per game. He also gets some rush attempts, and he's got that speed. They are leaning into it. While they're not lighting up the scoreboard, I think they should probably run the ball a little bit more. If you have JMO, you don't care. You're happy with this usage, and you should be firing him up. He looks like a very trustworthy fantasy option right now, and I think he's a must start until we see the volume dip down below like 7 targets. So I trust him. I think he's a very good play in what is likely a very high scoring game in Arizona. Number 18 and 19, though, I have both Seahawks top 2 receivers, DK Metcalf at 18, JSN right behind him versus Miami. And DK Metcalf was shut down in week 1, but he could not be stopped in week 2. He is notoriously bad against Jalen Ramsey, though, and this is his matchup this week. So I'm a little bit worried about it, but I think after last week's game against Christian Gonzalez, you're just going to have to start him no matter what. They do not trust Charbonnet the same as Kenneth Walker. So Geno will continue to sling it like crazy in Grubb's system until Walker returns. And I think Metcalf is still their best guy. Ramsey might lock him up a few plays here or there, but I think overall you're going to get enough volume to facilitate a top 20 performance. So I'm still starting Metcalf, but I think there's some really sneaky upside for JSN. And holy shit, last week was exceptional. I did not expect 16 targets from JSN in week 2. You love to see it. I've believed in his talent since he was drafted, but it just hasn't hit, and I was way too low in the ranks last week. He looks clearly above Tyler Lockett as of now. So it's great to finally see him live up to the potential. The volume probably won't be 16 targets every week. That's a little too high to expect. But if Ramsey is going to shadow DK Metcalf, then JSN could torch the Dolphins at home. Walker being hurt definitely helps the situation. So at least for now, I'll give JSN the green light in week 3. 16 targets in week 2 is a massive boost to your confidence. So he was exceptional against the Patriots on Sunday. He could do it again. I wouldn't be shocked if he's a staple top 20 play if this volume continues. Number 20, I have T. Higgins versus Washington, who is still questionable with the hamstring injury. So monitor his status. He may not play. It's also on Monday Night Football, the last game of the week, and that's not ideal. You're not going to have many other options to pivot to. But obviously, this rank is assuming he plays. I am leaning into this matchup, though, and I know he might be rusty off the injured hamstring, but the Commanders have been the, by far and away, best matchup for receivers in fantasy since last year. So, like I mentioned with Jamar Chase, 44 plus points allowed per game through the first 2 weeks is something you want to chase after. They are terrible. And if Baker can throw 4 touchdowns against them and Daniel Jones can look decent, you know Joe Burrow is about to light them up. So I'm trusting the matchup. If he plays, I want T. Higgins in my lineup. I wish we had some more clarity regarding the hamstring before Saturday even, but I think it's trending in the right direction, and I think he'll suit up. I think he'll be fine. I think he knows this is the better matchup to showcase his talent, and maybe it was just the hamstring injury and there's nothing else involved with him sitting out. But from a strategic standpoint, this is the game you want to come back. The Commanders will not be able to stop him. So I think both Jamar and T. Higgins go off if they both play, but Jamar is clearly the wide receiver 1 in this matchup. Number 21, though, I have Malik Nabers at Cleveland, and I told you he was a must-start last week. I was right about that. It was the Commanders' defense. After all, they had no answers. But he did get 18 targets, which was a lot more than I expected. If that's the volume you can expect, then this might be the lowest rank I have on him all season. Maybe he was not the ideal sell high option, but I doubt it. I think he'll start to trickle down the board as opponents realize he's the only piece they have to take away in order to stop the Giants' offense. So I don't love this matchup for him against Denzel Ward. I would have expected to rank him lower. He could definitely burn you this week against Cleveland, but 18 targets last week is just too much to ignore. I got to lean into it. And I understand if you think I should rank him even above like Jameson Williams, closer to DJ Moore, Zay Flowers, but I do worry about Denzel Ward. I want to see it one more time with Malik Nabers before I'm like, oh yeah, he's clearly top 15 every week. But last week was exciting. I think it was just the matchup. We will see. I still think he's a good sell high trade piece because the Commanders are just that terrible. Number 22, I have Calvin Ridley versus Green Bay, and wow, 2 touchdowns last week against the Jets. One of them was on the ground, but with Will Levis, you got to manufacture touches for your best player however you can, and I would expect him to get some jet sweep options every single week. And he looks pretty good. He has a bad matchup versus Jair this week, but it's not that much better in week 4 versus Ramsey. However, it was worse last week against Sauce Gardner. So I think I dismissed his upside a little too much, and I have to consistently rank him as at least a flex play because DeAndre Hopkins is completely irrelevant, and other than Pollard, there's not really anyone else that you can give the ball to in the Titans offense. So light him up. I think he's a legit start and a low-end wide receiver 2 moving forward. The volume is there, and the touchdowns appear to be hitting. Number 23, though, Calvin Ridley's replacement. In Jacksonville, I have Brian Thomas Jr. at Buffalo, and the Bills actually locked up Tyreek Hill and Waddle while Tua was on the field last week, but I think that was more so the divisional familiarity they have and a sense of urgency in division especially, and maybe the wind just helped them in week 1, so I'm not like completely believing that they're a stout secondary just yet. It has not been the best matchup so far. And last week he had Denzel Ward, which was also a bad matchup. Thomas was able to give you 94 yards though on 2 catches. He is deadly down the field. So he's starting to feel like a must start every week, potentially matchup proof, and he's very impressive right away. I love what I'm seeing from the rookie. And remember, he would have had 2 touchdowns, not 1, in week 1 if not for pass interference from Jalen Ramsey. So I think the matchups are about to open up here, and Brian Thomas feels like a lock in your lineup. I think a consistent top 25 receiving option moving forward if these trends continue. Number 24, though, I have Mike Evans versus Denver, and I expect Surtain to shadow him, but PFF actually ranks Surtain as one of the league's worst cornerbacks through 2 games, ranked 96th among the position, and I'm not that worried about it, honestly. He can still probably score a touchdown, but the volume has fallen a little bit this year. Godwin looks like their number 1 wide receiver moving forward, and Evans is more of a weekly flex with high-end upside rather than a top 12 play. I think the two have flipped in my mind and in my rankings. I'll be ranking Godwin well above Evans if the first 2 weeks are indicative of what to expect. So tough matchup for Evans, a big downgrade. Otherwise, he'd probably still be top 20. Number 25, though, I have Tank Dell followed by Stephon Diggs at number 26 on the road at Minnesota. And the Bears defense really clamped down in the second half. Houston's offense didn't get much going, but Dell was a non-factor in week 2. I still believe in him. I'm going to rank these two back to back one more time, but obviously if he doesn't break out soon, Dell is moving down the board. I just think there's a massive game brewing for him. It feels imminent. I wouldn't want to bench him when that happens, and that's why even after such a bad game in week 2, I think Stroud makes an effort to get him the ball and also score a touchdown. I think with a bit of spotlight on this game after the Vikings just beat the Niners, I think they want Dell to feel confident. So I still prefer Dell rest of season. I think Diggs is just a check down machine. He's been consistently involved so far, but the yards per reception is only 7. So you're not getting a big stat line from him. He's pretty touchdown dependent. He scored 2 in week 1, but last week we saw that the floor is not that safe. He only put up 5.7 points on like 4 catches. So I still think Diggs is the number 3 receiver in this offense. However, Nico Collins is way better than I thought, and Tank Dell has not emerged yet. So I'm still trusting both of them. But for now, they're more of like flex plays where Nico is like a clear top 5 option. I think Tank Dell will get rolling pretty soon, though. Number 27, though, I have George Pickens versus the Chargers. The LA Chargers actually rank as a bottom 2 matchup against the pass, but they faced off against the Panthers last week. That's a big reason why I'm not fully reading into their secondary being elite. Pickens was just shut down last week, but he's still clearly their best weapon. I think he gets back to business in the home opener. I think his explosive skill set makes him a weekly top 30 option, with the exception of some terrible matchups on some elite corners. But he was about a dozen spots lower last week for me, and I'm not worried about him in week 3. I think he's back to normal inside the top 30. Number 28, I have Drake London versus the Chiefs, and he looked good on that 1 touchdown drive, but Mooney is a factor. However, Pitts is not so far, so Cousins is going to keep him viable. He made some drastic improvements from week 1 just to week 2, and you expect that to get better as he's more removed from the Achilles injury, and they have to score a lot if they want a chance to beat the Chiefs. The Trent McDuffie matchup, though, is a little scary. I'm not going to pretend like that isn't a downgrade overall, and the Chiefs historically are very good at locking up number one receivers. So maybe this is more of a Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney matchup, but I still think based on the decision you made at draft day, you have to continue to start Drake London as a top 30 decent flex play. You drafted him to be a stud in your lineup, and while he's a bit more matchup dependent, I still think he has wide receiver 2 upside. This week, though, I'm tempering expectations. I think he'll be back in the top 20, though, pretty soon. Number 29, I have Rashid Shaheed versus Philly, and I owe him some respect. I have not been ranking him appropriately through the first 2 games. So here he is at number 29, and he feels due for a deep touchdown every week at this point. He has seen 1 more target than Olave, but only 4.5 targets per game. That's nothing like fantastic in terms of volume, but he turns it into 91 yards per game, 16.9 points per game, and the touchdown, while it might not always hit, if it does, you are getting like at least 10 points on that play. So I think you have to start him, especially because this matchup ranks top 2 against the wide receiver position. The Eagles cannot stop any wide receivers this year, and I think Shaheed goes off once again. Number 30, though, I have Xavier Worthy at Atlanta, and no, he's not getting a lot of volume, only 3.5 targets per game so far, but we know that he's a boom bust option to begin with. If he hits, it's going to be glorious, but last week the risk showed itself. I'm willing to take the chance, though, because the payoff is just so high. So without Pacheco, they need some other players to step up. He'll probably get some designed rush attempts here as well, and I think he's one of the players that will step up in Pacheco's absence. So I think you at least have to consider him, but if you want to avoid the risk, I understand benching him. He's not an absolute must start, and if he fails to score a touchdown, he might not get you 5 points. So good luck with Worthy, but I think this week it's probably worth gambling on one more time. I think he might score a touchdown. Number 31, though, I have Amari Cooper versus the Giants. And if all we cared about was targets, then Cooper would be ranked top 20 with 8.5 targets per game so far this season. But he's only catching 5 out of his 17 total targets, so 2.5 per week, for a total 27 yards, not per game, through 2 games. So that is dog shit. He has been terrible, and the volume is the only saving grace here with Amari Cooper. And that's why I still rank him here at 31 in the flex conversation, but if it doesn't translate to legit stats soon, then you'll have to bench him, and Deshaun Watson is just not offering any upside whatsoever for Cooper this year. So the only guy who's clicking in this offense is Jerry Jeudy, not Cooper, and that's actually pretty shocking when you think about Judy's career in Denver. So I'd be worried about Cooper right now. The Giants matchup, though, is a good one, and I wouldn't be completely surprised if he does bounce back in a big way. If he catches like 7 of those 9 targets, you'll have a very good game from Amari. Number 32, I have Michael Pittman versus Chicago, and it's another situation where targets are encouraging, but they do not immediately translate to upside, at least not yet. For Pittman, he's gotten 15 targets so far. He's caught 7 of them, but only for a total 52 yards over a 2-game sample size. And meanwhile, Alec Pierce, who nobody is starting or even rostering half the time, has 8 catches on only 10 targets for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. So there is massive upside in this offense. It's just not going to the players we want it to go to. And I'm sure this is very frustrating if you drafted Pittman, but at some point, I think Shane Steichen will figure this out. And I know Richardson is an erratic thrower, so this might take some time. I just don't think Josh Downs returning soon helps much either. And that's why I'm pumping the brakes. I think Pittman is not a must start at the moment. Coming into the season, I ranked him like 28, 29 overall, and here at 32, I kind of feel too high. I think that's emblematic of my concerns coming into the year on Pittman. He is not the safest play moving forward. Number 33, though, I have Jayden Reed at Tennessee, and the Titans are a bottom 6 wide receiver matchup. The Bears and Jets don't have the best receivers, though, but I do credit the Titans for not allowing a single wide receiver touchdown up to this point. So that's what I'm worried about with Jayden Reed, especially in the passing game. I don't think it happens for him. Trusting a Packers receiver with Malik Willis at quarterback is a very scary proposition. They ran it 32 times with Josh Jacobs last week, but Reed is still their best weapon at receiver, their best option, and I do expect him to get some rush attempts. Like last week, he'll offer you a little boost in value in that regard, but his ceiling is just too high to dismiss. I understand the floor is kind of non-existent in this current outlook for the Packers with Malik Willis, but I still think he's a decent flex play because that upside is just too high to ignore. Number 34, though, I have Jaylen Waddle at Seattle. And honestly, this downgrade to wide receiver 34 doesn't feel low enough, but it's possible that it's an overreaction by me. It could be a decent spot for him. Thompson did beat out Mike White as the backup quarterback, who last year we thought was a pretty serviceable option. Maybe Mike White just sucks, but maybe Skylar Thompson is legit and they just didn't want a third quarterback on the roster. So while it didn't look good last week with Skylar Thompson, now they have at least a full week of practice to prepare. It's also a long week. They played last Thursday, and Seattle does have an excellent number one corner, but he's probably going to be shadowing Tyreek Hill. So maybe they try to target the number 2 guy. However, that would be Tariq Woolen, who ranks as the number 1 corner on PFF so far. Devon Witherspoon ranks number 11. So this is not a good matchup at all. But they did just play the Patriots, and that's why I'm not like totally buying in to how elite he is. I'm a little worried about it, but I'm not giving up completely. I'm just definitely not excited with Waddle. And I think this week is more of a wait and see situation. With Thompson at quarterback, they have to travel across country, and it just doesn't feel good. The volume already wasn't great for Waddle to begin with. So at this point, I consider benching him, but in terms of upside, he is an interesting flex play if you need him. Number 35, though, I have Khalil Shakir versus the Jags, and Jacksonville has allowed 15 catches per game to receivers for 198 yards per game. That ranks second among all defenses, but it is skewed by the Dolphins game week 1, and that's why I'm not convinced it is a truly elite matchup. But the Browns have converted a lot of short passes last week, and that could lead to a good game for Shakir in the check down strategy of this matchup. But it's hard to trust any Bills receiver. He's been the most consistent, though, through 2 weeks. And considering he has the most established chemistry with Josh Allen dating back to last year, maybe this was obvious. He's a decent flex play, but is touchdown dependent. I don't love starting him. If I have to, though, I would consider it. Number 36, I have Darnell Mooney versus the Chiefs, and he looked great in week 2, but it was an elite matchup. Still, 7 targets, was tied with London for the lead on the team, and he offers some deep threat, big playability. So Cousins can get him the ball. We've seen number 2 receivers thrive with Kirk Cousins, so this could look pretty good all year. I think Darnell Mooney is a legit option on your bench, if not in your flex, and Pitts is not involved yet, so maybe that'll change, but at least for now, Mooney looks solid. There is a tough matchup here. For London, I think Mooney could have another good game for the second week in a row. Number 37, I have Jalen Nailor versus the Texans, and similar to Kirk Cousins, it looks like Sam Darnold can keep 2 wide receivers viable every week as well. So while Jordan Addison is out with his ankle injury, I think you can trust Jalen Nailor. Kevin O'Connell is dialing up elite play calling, and Darnold looks very confident right now. Jefferson is also banged up, so I think Nailor will step up consistently until Hawkinson and Addison are both 100% available, and that could be like after week 10. We might get 2 full months here with Nailor as a legit top 40 play. So I think he's a very valuable piece. If he is still on the waiver wire and you need depth at receiver, pick him up. He is legit. Number 38, I have Terry McLaurin at the Bengals, and this is a bottom 5 matchup for receivers so far. Cam Taylor-Britt has been excellent, and I am very worried about Terry being just a line of scrimmage check down guy so far for Jaden Daniels. Daniels is either being insulated by the play calling and never asked to throw it downfield, or he's just refusing to even look down the field, and that is why I don't think Terry offers any upside without a touchdown. And last week he caught 6 catches, but he only turned it into 22 yards. That is fucking terrible from a yards per catch standpoint. So you can't really use him. I don't think he's safe at all. Maybe in full PPR if you're like desperate, but there's no upside right now. It feels ridiculous. And I think at this point you are benching Terry and just hoping for a touchdown, but it probably doesn't hit. Jayden Daniels has not been throwing them so far, and the Bengals are a tough matchup. So I would be very worried. It's just the volume that makes you somewhat interested in McLaurin. Number 39, though, I have Rome Odunze at the Colts, and this is a top 5 matchup, but it's also hard to trust the Bears offense to make anyone other than DJ Moore viable in fantasy. But he does gain some value while Keenan Allen is out, so Rome is a bit more appealing, but he also has that knee injury going on, and that doesn't help him if he's not practicing much during the week. What can we really expect in the game? So volume is not there yet to fully trust. I think it could explode, though. However, he might be this year's JSN, and that would be very disappointing if it does come to fruition. So good luck with Rome. He's not terrible, but at this point, I'm trying to bench these receivers. Same applies with Ladd McConkey at Pittsburgh. I don't think Quentin Johnston is better than Ladd. McConkey, I think, is still the number 1 wide receiver here, but I don't think you can trust this passing game any given week to give you a solid floor without a touchdown. I think the touchdowns are also going to rotate between players a lot, and who knows, this could be the game where Palmer gets the most targets, and it could shift week to week. So the volume is just not high enough to carry you to safe production at any time. If I'm betting on one of their receivers for the Chargers, it's still Ladd, but I'm not excited to trust any of them until one player consistently emerges. And last week it was Quentin Johnston, but that was against the Panthers, kind of an obvious spot to try to get him involved against the worst team in the NFL. So I am not ready to like say which one is the best guy, but I think it's McConkey. However, Herbert is banged up right now. I think he'll play, but it's worth mentioning that leg injury is questionable for Herbert. So you can't start Ladd if Easton Stick gets the start, but I don't think you're starting him either way. Here at wide receiver 40, there are better options. Number 41, I have Diontae Johnson at the Raiders, and he was approaching Dumpsville with Bryce Young, but at least you're getting a glimmer of hope as Andy Dalton comes in. The problem is how much have these two practiced together. The target share hasn't overwhelmingly favored Diontae either. So I think Adam Thielen is actually a sneaky play to slot into the role he had last year in the season, because this offense is a complete gamble, and how much did Dalton actually practice with the ones? So you might still feel like he has zero value here. I'm talking about Diontae. After this game, the matchup is not that great. They do have some legit corners in Las Vegas. Number 42, I have Courtland Sutton at Tampa Bay, and in week 1, he had 12 targets, 4 catches, but in week 2, he had 4 targets and only 1 reception. So if you can only catch 25% of your targets, then what are you really getting with Courtland Sutton? I understand why they started to phase him out last week. I think he's still their number 1 wide receiver, but I can't say that for sure. You might rather have Josh Reynolds, and at that point, you might as well drop him if you have Sutton. So this is a very risky play, but Tampa Bay's corners are hurt right now, and this could offer some garbage time appeal for Bo Nix. This might be the last week, though, that I even consider starting Sutton, and I don't think you should. I think you should just wait and see. He could be droppable after this game. So no thanks with Sutton this week. I think it's too risky, but Jerry Jeudy is actually very interesting. He gets the Giants at home, which is a good matchup. Surprisingly, Jeudy is one of the only bright spots in the Browns offense. He's averaging 9.9 points per game through 2 weeks and averaged 7 targets per game for 4 catches, 49 yards per game. He also scored a touchdown in week 1. It's not elite, but it is something. And if he does find the end zone again, you're going to be pretty happy, but I think that's not safe to bet on. It is still a gamble, but he is better than I expected. I will give him some credit at this point. Number 44, I have Tyler Lockett versus the Dolphins, and he has been relegated to only 2 targets in week 2, but he did still look very good in week 1. He was the better of the 3 players, and while I still think now it's kind of obvious you definitely prefer JSN after last week's game, I still think he's not the worst option to flex if you're desperate. There will still be a few good games for Lockett this season. Predicting them is going to be hard, but he is still talented. He's not completely washed at this point. Number 45, I have Christian Kirk at Buffalo, and on paper, it's a bad matchup, but I'm mostly just terrified with Kirk because of his usage in the first two games. Only one catch in both of them, and last week he had negative yardage. I think he'll be better, but the bar is just so low. I don't think you can trust him right now at all. He feels way too risky, and I am worried that he is washed after last year's injury. It is possible he's just not the same player. You definitely prefer Brian Thomas, straight up. Number 46, though, I have Keon Coleman versus the Jags, and he led the team in targets week 1, but kind of disappeared in week 2. The game script never really needed him to step up, though, so I don't really read into it. I'm not giving up hope. I just think it might take some time to fully trust him, and I've seen more from Shakir, so I'd rather look there than towards any other Buffalo receiver. But Keon does have some upside. I don't think he's terrible, just not safe to start. Number 47, though, I might be too low on this ranking with Juaun Jennings at the Rams. There's no Deebo Samuel, and Aiyuk has not proven that he's fully back to 100%. So I still prefer Aiyuk, of course, but Purdy is going to need to lean on Jennings throughout this game and possibly for a while if Deebo does not get back soon. So I think he's a very sneaky pickup off the waiver wire. You should not forget about him, and he could go off for multiple touchdowns. I wouldn't be surprised. We saw that happen in the Super Bowl. So Jennings, I might be ranking too low here. Don't be surprised if I upgrade him as high as like wide receiver 38. I think Terry versus Juaun Jennings this week is a very legit question. Number 48, I have Demarcus Robinson versus the Niners in the very same matchup, and the Niners are actually the number 4 matchup for receivers so far, but 2 touchdowns to Lazard and a 97-yard touchdown to Jefferson are the main reason why I do not trust Demarcus Robinson to light them up. So he looks like their number 1 receiver, but if that's the case, then that's a big downgrade to his upside. He was already pretty touchdown dependent, and I don't feel good about this offense without Kupp or Puka. Number 49, I have Quentin Johnston at Pittsburgh, and shockingly, he looked pretty good versus the Panthers. He had one touchdown that was completely wide open. It was a body catch, but the first touchdown was all him from the jump. On the release, he was in charge over JC Horn, and Horn is legit. He was drafted pretty high a few years ago, so I do trust what I saw from Quentin Johnston, at least to be excited moving forward. I think he can possibly live up to his round 1 draft capital. If that happens, then watch out for this team. For now, though, I still prefer Ladd because this is the coaching staff that drafted Ladd McConkey. I think they prefer him long term, but Quentin Johnston has some size and speed that is hard to replicate. So if he can avoid dropping the ball, he could offer top 30 value this season. I wouldn't bet on it, but I'd rather roster Quentin Johnston over Josh Palmer right now. I think he's a very legit pickup at the moment. Number 50, I have Jalen Tolbert versus Baltimore, and Ferguson was out last week, so Tolbert did step up. I don't want to completely dismiss Brandon Cooks, but Cooks was never a target hog in this offense to begin with. So last week, Tolbert had 9 targets, and that was very exciting. Cooks had 2, but in week 1, it was flipped. Cooks had 7 and Tolbert had 2. So I think it might rotate between those two guys every single week. At the moment, though, I think you can roster Tolbert as well with hope that it leads to consistent volume. Once Ferguson comes back healthy, though, I doubt it turns into much. He's going to be very touchdown dependent moving forward. And that's what you're hoping for with all these players at this point. And I understand that this rank is risky, but I think Andrei Iosivas versus Washington is a very legit plug and play, especially if T. Higgins is out. He caught 2 touchdowns last week. The volume wasn't elite, but that is in his capability, and this matchup is one of the best you can ask for. It's one you should be chasing against the Commanders. You want to start receivers in this spot. So I'll be touting it all season long as the matchup to look out for, and especially if T. Higgins is out, there could be a massive game looming for someone other than Jamar Chase. So that's why I don't think Iosivas is a bad bet to make It could be Gesicki, it could be him, but I would trust the corners to not stop him at all. I think Yoshi could score a couple more touchdowns in this matchup. Number 52, I have Gabe Davis at Buffalo, and he's looked better than Kirk by a pretty big margin so far, and this is a revenge game for him. But will he light them up, or will they shut him down? You know he has the risk of a bagel any given week. I still don't trust him, and that's why at 52, I don't think you're starting Gabe Davis. Number 53, I have Romeo Doubs at Tennessee, and Doubs was decent for the second week in a row, but I just don't think you get enough volume to trust with Malik Willis at quarterback. But if I was starting a second Packers receiver, I think it would be Mr. Romeo Doubs. Number 54, I got Tutu Atwell versus the Niners, and I would be very concerned about trusting a Rams offensive player against San Francisco without Kupp or Puka on the field. But it's still McVay and Stafford. There is a chance that he blows up, and Tutu did have the same amount of targets as Demarcus Robinson last week. Good luck, though. You're going to need it. Number 55, I have Josh Reynolds at Tampa Bay, and he had a very good game in week 2. I still prefer Sutton, though, but that can quickly change. Nix has thrown it a lot so far, and we could see someone emerge as his favorite target pretty soon. So I wouldn't dismiss him completely. He did catch all 4 of his targets last week for 93 yards, and this matchup doesn't really scare you that much with the injuries in the secondary. Number 56, I have Allen Lazard versus New England, and he had 2 touchdowns in week 1, only 11 yards, though, in week 2. But Rodgers still likes him. However, once Mike Williams gets up to speed, we might not have any faith at all here. It's still risky, but could turn into 15-plus points if the right play does hit. Number 57, I have Christian Watson at Tennessee, and he's still very talented, but it's not trustworthy with Malik Willis at quarterback. He gave you a bagel in week 2, and while he could still offer a touchdown easily, there's upside for that on any given play. The risk is too high to ignore. Number 58, I have Wan'Dale Robinson at Cleveland, who had 12 targets in week 1. He had 4 targets last week, but he also scored a touchdown against Washington. So it's not the safest bet, but you're also not going to get a bagel either. And while Nabers looked elite, he does draw Denzel Ward coverage this week, so he could get locked up and double teamed all game. Wan'Dale is worth a consideration on your bench. Number 59 and 60, though, I have Greg Dortch and Michael Wilson versus Detroit, and this matchup is fantastic. It ranks number 3 so far for wide receivers through 2 games, and neither of these guys were involved in week 2. They each only had 2 targets, but Dortch did get 8 targets in week 1. Meanwhile, Michael Wilson scored a touchdown in week 1, and that's why they are interesting a little bit. There's one of them that could pop off because this matchup is just so good. If we got a blow-up game from one of them, I wouldn't be surprised. It's just hard to bet on. The odds are probably just saying, stick with Marv and McBride. It's too risky to trust anyone else. And last player I'll mention, an honorable mention here for Adam Thielen at Las Vegas at wide receiver 61. I think there is a world where Thielen reprises his role from last year as the double-digit target hog in the Panthers offense because Dalton is the quarterback now. And he probably didn't get many reps with the first team, Andy Dalton that is, and that's why I think the existing chemistry from last year is really going to help Thielen at the moment. They want to get Diontae involved. They traded for him for a reason. He has a big contract, but I think this week could easily be fool's gold, and because of it, we might see an interesting workload for Thielen. There is a chance he blows up, but against Las Vegas, it's not the best matchup. I'd rather just ignore all of the Panthers receivers and reevaluate after this game. So that's it for my wide receiver rankings. Here are the top 60 on the screen here, where I think you're feeling really confident with the top 19. I think all the way through JSN, they are locks in your lineup. There's been at least one good game for them, or they are clearly due to live up to expectation, like Brandon Aiyuk this week with no Debo or Chris Olave against the Eagles. So I feel really good about the top 19. Even T. Higgins feels like an excellent option. It's just a question of, is he healthy or not? I think you have some really good flex options all the way through Rashid Shaheed, the top 29, I think are very good starts this week. Starting with Xavier Worthy, though, there is a legit amount of risk moving forward, and it does become more of a toss-up. But I still feel confident in at least like 8 or 9 points from the top 37. I think all the way from Worthy to Jalen Nailor, you have very legit arguments to be made that you should be starting these players. But starting with Terry McLaurin in a tough matchup, I feel very concerned, and I think it's very risky moving forward. You are praying for touchdowns, and most of the time it will not hit. So good luck to you this week. I hope you win. Let me know in the comment section down below if you have any start-sit decisions, and I'll be happy to answer them before kickoff. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. My name is Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.